The Able to Care podcast is sponsored by Able Training Support Limited, who build partnerships with organisations to develop confidence and competence in their team to promote positive outcomes for all. Find the link in the description. Hello and welcome to the Able to Care podcast. Today we have the honour of speaking with Charlie Beswicks, an inspirational mother, entrepreneur, author and advocate. Charlie is the founder of several impactful businesses and the author of the Amazon bestseller Our Altered Life, which chronicles her journey as a mother to her twin sons, one of whom, Harry, was born with complex disabilities. So Charlie's mission is to provide support, guidance and resources to other parents and professionals who are supporting individuals with visible and invisible disabilities as well. Fostering an incredible community around you, Charlie, through all the different pathways that you've gone down. So first off, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Andy. Thank you for chatting with me.
That's right. Absolutely. My pleasure. So we chatted a little while ago and obviously I found out we can see in the background there for those people who are watching. So we can see the Send Gin and Cheese and then the other sort of businesses or other CIC, as you say, that's a CIC. So community projects that you do. So we'll go into a little bit on those because I think all of them have a slightly different purpose, don't they? As far as you're engaging with lots of different people in lots of different ways. But should we start off with why? What started this off?
Right. So my boys started this off 2005. My twins were born. I'd had a very healthy pregnancy and was quite smug to be found out that I was having twins. My family and friends are literally, sort of, if you're going to do a job, you don't do it by halves. So there I was having twin boys. And then when the boys arrived, we found out that Harry had Goldenhar syndrome. So for him, that means that he was born with no eye socket, no ear, no nostril, short underdeveloped jaw. We were told that he may have brain damage and never walk. Thankfully, he's super mobile, but he is profoundly autistic. So although my boys turned 19 this year, Harry functions a lot younger than that, and he has limited communication and lots of different needs. That means he's never going to live independently, and it always requires one-to-one. So that's it, in a whistle-stop tour. That's kind of why, as to where the journey started, I guess. That's probably the where, because for the first 4 or 5 years, I really struggled with everything. And I'm brutally honest in the book about my reluctance to be a special needs mom. I didn't want a disabled child. I didn't see myself fitting into that world. It wasn't part of my plan. I felt incredibly guilty. I grieved for lots of things, the life that I would never know and my children would never know. And so it was a really complex time for me. So I would say certainly the first 4 years were really challenging. And then the why came probably a little bit later.
You spoke there a little bit about guilt. And obviously, I think I can completely understand an element of grieving that you must go through as a parent, which is a strange thing because you'd still had 2 children, obviously just one different from what you were expecting. But I can completely understand that grieving process that many people go through when they find out their child isn't typical. And maybe it's the ideas we have and the expectation we have of what motherhood's going to be like or parenting's going to be like, but also what the future is going to be for our children of like attending their wedding and doing this and graduating school and all these kind of almost photographs we have in our head of what we think our life's going to lead into, then doesn't go that way. So I really get the grieving. Where do you think the guilt came from? Where did you get that feeling of guilt?
Before I answer that one, just to mention the grief aspect is that lots of people think that comes just at the beginning, and it really doesn't. It comes every time you are reminded that your life is slightly different. So every time there's a school play that you can't attend, or a prom or a graduation or an event, or things that your peers are celebrating for and with their children that you can't celebrate. So that grief is lifelong. And I have to say as well that when I talk about grieving for my child, it doesn't mean I don't love him. You can absolutely grieve for the life you didn't have and still absolutely love your child and honour and love the life that you do have. So I just want to make that really clear. In terms of guilt, I carried my boys. I gave them what I believe to be the best of me as a start. And so when you're not given an explanation, the logical place to turn is to yourself. If they had come and said to me, it's X, Y, and Z has caused this, I would have had somewhere to channel that loss and that guilt and that grief, but I didn't. And they would say, it's just one of those things. It could have happened to anybody. And then instantly I'm thinking, but well, it must have been something that I did. Our brains are not very good with the unknown, which is why we often think worst case scenario, because it's better than the unknown. And so, on a neurological level, my brain's searching for an answer that there wasn't out there. And so for me, it made very cruel sense to blame myself and to feel guilty as the parent that had nurtured and grown these boys. That's exactly where the guilt came from.
That's really interesting. I think that, as you said, from a psychological point of view, that makes complete sense. Human beings are always looking for agency. We're always looking for an answer of what caused this, but then just getting that answer of, well, nothing caused it. It's just, chance, is very difficult for people to cope with emotionally and psychologically. So I suppose you're looking for that scapegoat or that causation, I suppose, in some ways. But when there's nobody else out there that you feel can, internalizing that's must be a really difficult journey to go on. And I suppose that's part of the grieving process as well, isn't it? As far as that kind of the anger, but it sounds like you turn that anger on yourself rather than being able to turn the anger anywhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of my biggest mistakes was that I really didn't talk to people about how I felt. Before the boys were born, I was known as someone that had got it all together, really organized, really positive. And people were saying to me, if anybody can do this, it's you. You've got this, you're going to be brilliant. And whilst that was absolutely gorgeous of them and very well intentioned, what it did, it created a bar for me to live up to. It created this expectation that I had of myself that I wouldn't let people down. And so I call it the lie we wear, which is that big smile that we paint on our face that says, sure, I'm fine, when actually I was imploding. And so I think my journey was harder because I didn't feel that I could let people down more further than I already felt I had, kind of. And a lot of our beliefs go back to our early childhood. And as the daughter of a mum, sort of single parent, helped raised by my grandparents, if you cut me through the middle, it would have said, make people proud. That was literally my mantra since I was about 5. And so I just felt that I'd let people down by giving my husband at the time, a child that may not ever fulfill his dreams as well.
Yeah, that's quite impactful. There's a few things that you mentioned there that kind of just are not in my mindset as kind of, as you said, the grieving isn't just once, it's lifelong. You don't just get over it. It's one thing that I think, of course, that makes complete sense. But it's also the that anger towards yourself in that process is really interesting. So when you said that people were kind of setting that expectation, which, as you said, it feels like the right thing to do, doesn't it? From other people's point of view, going, I'm going to tell you can manage it, you'll be okay. And I think that is I think there's a general thing across parenting generally, that always a case of, a little kick in, natural motherly instinct, you're amazing, you've got that nurturing instinct, you'll be fine. Then doesn't allow people to kind of go, no, this is really hard. I always think is one of the worst almost scripts that society tells us that motherhood is a natural process in some degrees. I always kind of point out that some of our closest relatives, like baboons, for instance, who live in social groups, the first few infants die, but we have to get it right first time. There's this huge expectation. We're not allowed practice times. Do you know what I mean? But I suppose that does stop many mothers, parents, being able to go, I'm struggling with this. That I'm finding this difficult, especially because I know that there's, I think your relationship did break down. Is that the case? Yeah. Was that in those first 4 years as well that the relationship broke down? Yeah. So you were becoming a single mum as well. So that script as far as your mum being a single mum, hey, I'm a single mum too, so I should be able to do this because she did that.
Yeah.
Did that hit you as well?
It did. I mean, I was very fortunate to be growing up with mum and nan and granddad around me. So I always knew that I'd got a sort of army of backup. Yeah. But I think I felt that I just needed to be that army for my children. And I just put that huge pressure on myself. I was never offered postnatal support at all. Never. As many parents will know, that you're handed a leaflet or you're told, please don't Google it. And I was just Harry's got Goldenhar syndrome. Please don't Google it. And I was like, that's the first thing I'm going to do. Of
Of
course I
course it is.
But yeah, I think back to the point that you mentioned about people giving you those sort of compliments and those phrases. I think it's much easier for us to let people know that we believe in them than it is to open that awkward conversation of a question. So we're really quick to say, oh, that must be awful, but I'm sure you'll be okay, or you've got this, rather than
Yeah.
that sounds crap. What do you need? Opens a really difficult conversation. And I think sometimes people don't have the time, they don't have their own bandwidth in their own lives,
Mm.
and they don't have the skills to deal with the answers. So it just gets so complex in terms of the mums and the dads dealing with their own emotions, and then that interaction with other people. And other people would
Mm.
come to me expecting me to be the expert on Goldenhar syndrome in the first, 6 months of Harry's life. So what does that mean for him?
Wow.
Does it mean he'll die young? And they're asking me these questions, and I'm like, I really don't know. Please don't ask me. Please don't make me think about that question. You know. But people would come sort of expecting me to have all the answers. So you've got that pressure as well, where people turn to you as the oracle, thinking that you've got the answers, and you just haven't.
I find it so strange in some ways that, as you said, you've got this child who obviously got significant additional needs, but even if he didn't have the learning disabilities and the autism and things like that, obviously you wouldn't have known that in the early stages anyway, particularly, would you? But there must be. It feels shocking that there isn't, like, as you say, a leaflet. That's all you get, kind of like, good luck on your way. That there isn't a. So why isn't there? And I suppose this is why you started doing what you do a little bit. Why isn't there an immediate kind of thing going, hey, you should talk to these people, because don't walk out of here thinking you're going to be able to do this on your own, because you will burn out too quickly and it's not the best interest of your children. So talk to these people.
Yeah, there's a few reasons. I think the healthcare system that we've got now is designed for immediate care. It's designed to deal with the there and then, particularly, for example, around premature babies or babies in general. It's about getting them well and back out into the community. And we're very much a conveyor belt now of next in, next out. So I think there's definitely a capacity issue. And then I think the second issue is that services are few and far between. Often they are charities that might not exist in 5 or 10 years. So signposting can become really complex. People aren't always sure, what will be available in one local authority, for example, might not be available somewhere else. So nationally, the national picture is very disjointed and can be really confusing. So I completely understand why healthcare professionals are nervous about doing that. However, I do think there is a discussion generally around, you will need mental health support. You will need somebody that really understands, and maybe try these national organisations in the first port of call. But remember, I would have just loved somebody to say, you're not failing. By asking for help, you are absolutely not failing your children, your husband, your family. You are making sure that you are well resourced and that you are well enough to provide for everyone. We're the glue that keep everything together. And I would have really appreciated somebody sitting me down and just saying, the bravest thing you could do now would be to let people know you're breaking.
I think. Do you think that's a British cultural thing? Are we worse for that than anywhere else?
I think so. Yeah, I do think so. But I think we also then buy into that narrative, and it just perpetuates the problem. So I think, while that is certainly a cultural issue for us, I think the more we play into that, the more damaging it can become.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. It just, I mean, I think across the board, really. I don't know. Obviously, you do get health visitors and stuff like that, obviously, in the early stages when you're a parent and stuff like that. But, did they not kind of offer you resources or anything along those lines?
So the first health visitor that came out to see me, my boys were still
Mm.
in hospital. They stayed in hospital for the first 6 weeks. And she sat down opposite me and she said, so I understand your son has golden something. Do you think it was something you did?
Oh.
Which is why I laughed when you asked me the question. And I just said, I really don't know. And I'm not feeling up to this today. And before she'd left my driveway, I rang the clinic and said, don't ever send that woman back to my house again. Yes, I do think it's something that I did. And I'm really battling with this. And I do not need somebody who's supposed to be a professional.
Yeah.
So, there's a training need, there's a conversational need. I now do training with health visitors, potential health visitors when they're studying at university, physiotherapists, anybody that's going to be in contact with families who have medically complex, disabled children with additional needs. They need to have these conversations and this training.
100%. I'm shocked, genuinely shocked by that. The first thing, there's certain things that I find doing the podcast so interesting and talking to people with lived experience like yourself. Because for me, it's just a common sense. Of course you don't say that, but then common sense doesn't exist. You have to educate people.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, common sense isn't very common.
No, it isn't. Oh dear, oh dear. Okay, so, I mean, one of the things I think is really interesting, and it must have been so difficult to navigate in some ways, is obviously it's twins.
Mm-hmm.
So you have one child who is classed as typical, and the other child with a very significant both physical and invisible disabilities and differences.
Yeah.
How is that navigating the kind of the parenting two very different children?
Yeah.
I suppose.
Really difficult. And I look back and again, I have guilt about the fact that Harry, through nobody's fault and completely rightly, needed all of my time and attention. But that meant that Oliver missed out on quite a lot. And I always say that siblings are the unsung heroes of stories like mine. People often feel sorry for the disabled child. And actually, they don't know any different. Harry absolutely loves his life. He's the happiest young man. The parents, for me, I was going through in the thick of it. I was just going through the process of trying to care for myself and them and doing the best that I could with all that I got at that time. But then you've got the siblings that often deserve centre stage and have to wait in the wings, often have to grow up a little bit quicker than their peers. I remember Oliver crying one day saying, some boys at school were telling me about fighting with their big brother, and I wish I could fight with my brother. I wish Harry would talk to me, and that's just heartbreaking when you hear that. So the siblings absolutely, get a rough ride in the whole journey of this.
I can understand again the kind of the hindsight guilt must be there and significant, but it's always that you did the best you could with the information and knowledge and resources you had at the time. If you've got one child who's got significant additional needs, if it's only you, the other child's always going to miss out to some degree or another unless you had additional support and resources. Do you think anybody else ever, as you were meeting people through those early stages of obviously getting to grips and learning what you now know, and I'm sure that you still don't feel you're ever at the end of that journey as far as learning, but I'm sure if you could go back in time, you're going, oh my goodness, if I could only take that knowledge with me. Did anybody else kind of pick up on that and kind of, because my instinct to be, and I'm not trying to big myself up, but I'd kind of go, hey, do you want a day where I take Oliver out? Can we go? I'll go and take him out and we'll do something fun, and then you could spend a real day focusing on Harry, or vice versa. Maybe it's more difficult the other way because depending on Harry's needs, nobody else could look after him because they didn't have the knowledge to. But did anybody think like that?
No.
No.
Not even, and I love her dearly, but not even my own mum. In fact, it was only probably when Harry was in his teens that my mum babysat. So, and this is 73% of marriages where a disabled child is born will end in divorce. And one of those reasons is respite. Harry slept for 3 hours a night, and we couldn't sustain that. But then once we were separated, I got a full night's sleep. Their dad got a full night's sleep. And we were able just to find some semblance of who we were as individuals before all this happened. And that is absolutely not blaming our boys. Again, it's their fault. It is just real life. And yeah, I think Harry's condition made people very nervous, made people really quite scared. And when me and my first husband, I remarried, my first husband, when we got married, nobody had our baby. Our boys were one when we got married, and nobody had the boys overnight for his biggest day of our life. And we just wanted to, just have a drink and relax and just, and we weren't allowed that because people were too nervous. So yeah, there was a huge lack of support in that respect, and I understand why, but it did make things really difficult.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? That, is that a contributing fact? We used to be raised by the village, and now we are so isolated. Your parents used to be down the road, so they'd nip in and look after the kids. Your sister lived next door, so that you would like take over. That we had this such a sense of community that you did get that respite because the kids did just go out for the day. You know what I mean? Because they could run around and be in the street, and because nanny was over there and sis was over there. Now we're in this isolated situation that then, yeah, how do you both get a night's sleep? Well, the only way to do it is that's it. We split up. And I'm not saying that's the cause, obviously, but, split up and suddenly there's this benefit from that of just realization. It's,
And I think, we
very odd.
talked culture earlier, and I think that's where other cultures have got it right. Where they may live in extended families will live in one house, but they've always got somebody, they've always got each other there. And I think that's something that's lost in British culture today, certainly.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. But it sounds like there was a nervousness from other people anyway, as far as, do you think that's more significant? Like if, let's say, Harry had, let's say he was wheelchair bound, for instance, and maybe it was a mobility thing. Do you think the facial disfigurement that he has is a significant contributing factor to how unsettled and uncertain people feel to be able to meet his needs?
That's a really good question. I think when Harry was younger, the craniofacial condition that he's got, it would impact his breathing overnight and his drinking and his eating. So I think that was the nervousness around, what will happen. My ex-husband and I had to take it in shifts to keep checking on him when he was a baby. And so, I understand that there would be that nervousness. And I think because people could see that there was no quick fix with this, it wasn't just, something that would get better in a couple of weeks or months. I just think that the unknown, as it does with everybody, was terrifying. I think where children have got a wheelchair, you've then got the mobility issues, but you've also got a child that can maybe talk to you and explain how they're feeling as they get a little bit older, whereas Harry was not verbal for such a long time, and his behaviour, because of his autism, could be really unpredictable. And so people could see me struggling with him and think, well, if his own mom is finding this difficult, I don't stand a chance. And I am just speculating at that point, because we didn't ever have that conversation. It was really difficult for me and the boy's dad to kind of go to our parents and say, why don't you help us more? We didn't ever do that. We would maybe talk to each other a little bit about it, but we never sort of talk that to our families. So it's just one of those unknowns.
Yeah. I'm just thinking it from, maybe there's just a greater knowledge, or maybe people are more aware of things like the mobility issues. As you said, maybe it is a combination of the differences that kind of Harry had, and I suppose the breathing challenges and stuff like that is that nervousness of what if something goes wrong. Whereas if somebody's legs don't work, for instance, it's probably not going to be a medical emergency. I know that you, so one of the activities or businesses, or however you refer to all these little enterprises that you have, I can't remember the name of it, but it's related to the More Than a Face. Have I got that right? Yes.
Well done. Yeah.
Okay. So as far as More Than a Face, because obviously Goldenhar syndrome affects kind of facial configuration and facial development, it is something that's very, very visible, isn't it, for other people? And I should imagine that's something you've encountered some very odd reactions, or Harry's experienced some very odd reactions as well from people.
Yeah.
And is that kind of why you developed that business, to help people know what to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd written the book and published that, and really enjoyed that process. It was never really going to be a book. It was just a cathartic exercise on my behalf. And then friends read it and just said, you just need to publish this. So I did that, and then carried on writing blogs, because I do love writing. So, and I was getting mums coming back to me saying, oh, this has really helped me. So I kind of, does that make people proud of me that I mentioned earlier? And you're making
Yeah.
to help people. So I thought, well, I'm helping mums, and I've been a teacher since 2008. So I was like, well, what else can I do? And then, I was, we are acutely aware that Harry looks very different. And we would encounter, if we're out and about, we'd encounter pointing, stares, whispering, grimacing, giggling, name calling. And I just thought maybe I could help children to understand and to see Harry behind,
Mm.
see past his appearance. And so I founded More Than a Face, which was a charity originally. It's now a project of Our Altered Life, um, to go into schools and educate children and help them to see that, people that look different, that's on a neurological level, it's natural to be startled.
Mm.
We have neurons that are, and I didn't realize this until I started looking into it. We have neurons that are designed to recognize two eyes, one nose. We've got this preconception of what a person's going to look like. And when we see somebody that doesn't meet those needs, neurologically, we're startled. And I will say to them, that's absolutely fine. Nobody's going to judge you for feeling, oh, it's what you do after that that makes the difference.
Mm.
And so I just encourage them to get to know Harry. I show YouTube clips. I talk about his likes, his dislikes, and just get them to find that common ground. And it's absolutely one of the best things I've ever done in my life. The days that I do in schools are just incredible. And I work with primary schools on that kind of, precept, get to know Harry. And on the high schools, it's very much around social media and managing the way that we are treating other people, filters, use of Instagram filters, the impact of that on mental well-being as well. So
Right. Okay.
cover a whole spectrum of issues.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. So you go a little bit further than just understanding individuals who look different. You're also getting people to look at their own identity and how they view their faces and stuff like that. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
I suppose as you said there, we notice. We are pattern recognition machines, and therefore that's why we can see a face in a cloud or in a stump of a tree and things like that. And it can look like a face, but that's our brain configuring that and working it. So then suddenly, yes, something you're expecting to be a face looking different from a typical face absolutely causes that our brain to go, huh?
Yeah.
I think there's this weird concept as well. I hear people sort of say, children aren't born racist as an example, but no, they're not born racist, but they are born to identify difference.
Yes.
But it's, as you say, it's a way that's then educated and supported to going, yeah, it's different, but that isn't bad. It isn't, it's just different.
Yeah.
And it's that humanization, isn't it, that you're looking to try and promote there, that, yeah, it doesn't matter how a person looks.
Sure.
Have you ever heard of Horn effect?
No.
So there's a form of cognitive bias. There's halo and Horn effect are two forms of cognitive bias. Halo effect is that people who are considered to be stereotypically good looking are also assumed to be more honest and more intelligent.
Okay.
People with facial disfigurement are usually assumed to be lower in intelligence and lower in honesty.
Okay.
And it's a form of cognitive bias that people have, the completely subconscious prejudicial bias. But yeah, I think obviously that's quite ties in with what you do, doesn't it?
It definitely does. And I think the media plays a huge part in this. If you think about villains in films and the bad guys, there's always a burn, there's always a backstory, there's always some birthmark. I could ream off the villains where there is some kind of visible difference there. And the narrative there is that these people are to be feared. These people are evil. These people won't add anything good to your life. And so subconsciously from a very young age, when you're watching things like Marvel or DC, we are being primed that difference is bad. So we've got all these sort of aspects feeding into us as well.
I suppose as a counter to that, one of my favorite films, and I think it kind of almost switches that slightly, is The Goonies.
Yes.
If Sloth from The Goonies, that obviously there's this scary monster in the basement and stuff, but actually he's just the loveliest, kindest kind of guy. And that's a wonderful example of kind of the counter narrative to that, isn't it?
It is. Online, we get a lot of people commenting on Harry's pictures, hey, you guys. And we get that a lot. And I'm a bit like, you're insulting him, but actually, Lawrence was a really cool dude, so go for it. But yeah, I mean, it is, but it was ahead of its time, I think, in terms of, recognizing that everybody was startled by this man that looked so different. But then at the end, like you say, big heart, lovely, lovely guy. Ahead of its time for sure.
It's interesting you knew the actor's name. So I take it, did you do some research on him because it kept getting referred to them?
So his name is Lawrence in the film. So,
okay.
Yeah, the guy that's I'm sure it's Lawrence. One of your listeners will be like, no, she's got it wrong. So he's his birth name because they call
Yeah.
it was
I think I do vaguely remember them referring to that at some point throughout, don't they?
you know, and again, you know, sloth being just the name of an animal, it's an object, just objectifying him. But once they know his actual name, then it kind of adds another. It's very subtle. It's not maybe something I would have picked up on had I not had Harry, actually. But
thank you for listening to the Able to Care podcast. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, comment, and share. We really appreciate all of you listeners. So, obviously, Harry, as well as his physical differences, he also obviously has his high level of autism. So how aware do you feel Harry is about his differences?
I think personally, he's aware of how he looks, but only sort of when it changes. So for example, he recently had an operation about 3 weeks ago, and he had a growth removed from inside his head that was pushing on his eye socket, and he had to have his eye sewn closed, his bad eye sewn closed for a while. And he wouldn't look at himself in the mirror, or he wouldn't look at himself if I was taking a photograph of us. And he would put his hand over his eye and he'd say, "No, good boy, good boy, good boy," meaning don't. I feel like I'm being punished to show me. But in terms of other people's reactions, he's quite oblivious is too strong a word, because I'm never going to know how much Harry understands. But he doesn't show me that he understands a lot of what people are doing. I think for me, I worried when Harry was younger, although we've always had discrimination, we've always had negative comments. When you've got a child that looks different, it can be passed off as quite cute and novel. But I know that when I die, he's going to be an adult in the community that looks very different to other people. So my work, as much as, yes, I want it to be about Harry's awareness, that's almost sort of a byproduct with his autism, because I want to be aware of him and treat him with compassion. Luckily, he's quite well known in our local town, because he's always with me, and we've got quite a big social media presence locally. So that's beautiful for me, because people will say, "Hi, Harry," and they don't kind of grimace away. And if I could get more of that for Harry and for people like Harry, it's not the Harry show. It's about just giving people that grace to say, just take a breath before you react. That's just pause for a millisecond before you react, because that is somebody's son or brother or cousin, or so yeah. And I, in high school, I talk a lot about the fact that there is congenital disfiguration, this sort of disfigurement, and there's also acquired. So you're sitting there as teenagers judging somebody like my son, but actually, there are various reasons: burns, car accidents, facial cancers, acid attacks, why our appearance might change in a heartbeat. And you can see some of them thinking, "Oh yeah, I've never even thought of it like that," sort of thing. So
would you hope that, because I've heard other people kind of mentioning, other people with differences going, "I'd rather you come and encourage your children to ask a question. If your kids are staring." Because I remember when there was a TV presenter that obviously there was petitions about, because she only had one arm and they wanted to take him down because it was scaring their children. I was like, it's not scaring your children. They probably had a question and you felt uncomfortable about how to answer that question. And therefore you've decided it was easier to write a letter to the BBC, which blows my mind. But yeah, I think that's... So was that what you'd encourage? Why don't you go over and ask that lady a question about her son, or ask him, or, what would you prefer?
Yeah, for me, absolutely. I think the caveat to that is sometimes parents aren't ready for it. So I think in the first instance, and when I'm doing my assemblies, I always say the best thing any child can do is just smile at them and maybe give them a thumbs up. Because when a child smiles at Harry, what that says to me without them saying a word is, "I'm accepting you. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to be mean. You're okay here." And I think if that smile then turns into a "Hey, wave," if I'm getting Harry to wave back, then the parent's in a place where you can ask questions. So that would be my first advice: is always just smile. Just get your children to smile at everybody. I walked into a local supermarket recently, and Harry was having quite a big, it wasn't a meltdown, he was having quite a rant, and he was sort of jumping up and down and screeching very loud. Lots of people stared, and there was a young girl in front of us. She looked about 8, and she turned on, she gave Harry the biggest sort of smile. And I stopped her mum and I said, "Can I just say, your daughter's so gorgeous. She's just give my boy the biggest smile, even though he's making a ruckus. You're doing a really good job. And she was like, oh, thank you so much. So I'm the over the top parent now that goes the opposite way. But that wasn't an overnight thing. I would have been I would have always been grateful for people to ask questions. I would have never fallen out with anybody. But it made me feel a little bit uncomfortable at the beginning. I think, yeah, absolutely smile. And if the parent engages back, then you've got the green light to maybe ask a question and just say, oh, could we just come and say hello to your child, please? And just go along that lines, really.
Oh, that should just be put on signs. Everybody kind of just tell your child to smile, and if the parent then encourages smiling back, they're giving permission to communicate. And
absolutely.
Because simple scripts like that, I think many people would benefit of knowing what appropriate social interactions are across the board, not just in your circumstance.
Yeah, because there is that fear, isn't there? Culture, we're very polite. We don't want to offend people. So that there is that fear that you're going to say the wrong thing. So I think, smile goes a long way.
Yeah, you also get the other people though that are like a bull in a china shop and just have no tact and subtlety or anything like that. They'll come in and going, "What's wrong with?" sort of thing as well. Yeah,
you do. Yeah.
I take it Harry has a lot of difficulties with sensory processing as well as part of his autism and stuff. So has that caused problems as far as his care is concerned? Because is there a lot of additional care that has to happen because of the facial differences and the physical disabilities, or is that kind of it just is as it is now? He doesn't have to.
So with the Goldenhar syndrome, there tends to be impact around things like dental, because his jaw's so short he can't brush his teeth independently. So there's dental care. There's things like preserving the eyesight in his one eye is really difficult when he doesn't have ears, because glasses aren't, and he doesn't have a bridge of a nose.
Of course.
So, so those kind of things become challenging around that kind of aspect of medical care. And then you've got, with his autism, you've got the personal care, so dressing him, taking care of his personal needs, his showering and things like that. So yeah, both aspects of his conditions do impact the care that he receives.
Yeah. So how have you, or what do you do to help Harry cope in the world that you've learned so far?
Oh, wow. Okay. What, in terms of just being out and about?
Yeah.
Crikey. You're asking some really good questions. These are questions.
That's good.
I've been on loads of podcasts and nobody's asked me these. I'm knackered. I'm going to need a little lie down. I think a variety of different things. I think going out, there's lots of prepping with autistic children. So lots of now and next. And Harry, even at almost 19, will still ask me, has this morning been asking me, and then. So there's a lot of verbal, initially pictorial prompts, and then we moved away just to verbal prompts that are constant reassurance, constantly managing expectations. I can't say yes to Harry to something if it's not going to happen, because then he'll get really obsessive about things. So a lot of that has been about me relearning what I can and can't say. I don't reverse if he's in the car if I can help it, because that's a trigger for him. So little things like that, really knowing him. Traffic lights, massive trigger for him. So I will drive 10 miles out of my way rather than sit in temporary traffic lights, because if they were on a route that he knows is a typically smooth route, that's awful. So there's lots of, I think, getting to know him. And I think this is why lots of parents feel that they're failing at the beginning, because they're still getting to know their children. They're still getting to know their triggers and their clues as to what will distress them. Once we know them, we can then work with it. There's a lot of finding out at the beginning, and that's really tricky. So yeah, I guess managing his expectations, just lots of training around, holding by the wrist. I don't particularly, I do now, but when he was younger, I wouldn't hold him by the hand. I would hold him by the wrist, because the amount of times he's wriggled out of a handhold and ran across the road to get to a toy shop isn't he? He wouldn't have reins on, because that would distress him. He'd just drop to the floor or kick. There's little things like that. And in some ways, I'm quite fortunate that Harry looks the way he does. Because if anyone was to see me walking down the road with a typical looking child, holding them by the wrist, talking to them in very short information carrying words only, almost not barking, but very like, Harry, stop, Harry, no, Harry, listen, Harry, good boy. If anybody heard me talking to Oliver like that, they'd be thinking, oh, she's not a very good mum. And you get years of judgment there. So in some ways, I'm easily forgiven, and Harry is easily forgiven for his behaviour because he looks different, because there's that visible explanation. I think parents who have autistic children without any visible recognition, have it much harder than me.
Yeah, that's really interesting perspective. And you're 100% right. Yeah, as you say, just because when you were saying it, talking about holding by the wrist, I teach a lot around restraint training and stuff like that. So I was immediately like, oh, I bet that gets some looks. I bet people are a little bit judgy on that point. Yeah. But because of that difference in the way he looks, there's an immediate kind of almost acceptance. Oh, there must be something different about this child, which is why he's being spoken to and treated differently.
It's our get out of jail card. He's a monkey for sort of running through the aisles of places like Home Bargains or B&M because he wants to get to the toy section. And he will lead like a dog at Crufts through all these little old ladies and knock baskets and things. And you can see they're turning around, they're disgraced. And then they see his face, you get the head tilt and they, oh, bless him. So yeah, he gets away with murder because he looks as gorgeous as he does.
I just wondered, obviously, again, the focus there is on Harry, but there's many people who are listening that find the fact that you had twins and had to negotiate and navigate that kind of something that resonates with them as far as, whether it be a foster parent with 2 children in a household or a foster child and biological children or siblings of a child with additional needs. So obviously I asked the question there about how did you help Harry to cope, but how have you helped Oliver to cope with everything that he's gone through?
Yeah, I mean, that's been a little bit difficult, been more difficult, I would say, more challenging, because with Harry, it's just been very obvious there and then. Whereas with Oliver, it's become evident later on that there's been, damage is too strong a word, but there's been an impact. So I think 3 things that I've done with Oliver is that we've had a little phrase. So when I say to Oliver, what are you? He will say the greatest thing you ever did. And so he started that when he was 5. We first separated, me and their dad. And he said to me, Mummy, you always say Harry's special, but you don't say I'm special. Why? And I could have just cried because I thought, I'm saying special meaning different, disabled, all these words that aren't very nice about his brother. And he's hearing that he's less than. So I started to say that to him. And even now, if I was to text him now and say, Oliver, what are you? He would text me back and say the greatest thing you ever did. And I just think that it's that automatic acknowledgement, that little thing that him and I have got together. The second thing is that I have tried to give him some autonomy in or some sort of control of our lives. So I'll say, like, what do you want? Tuesday night's Oliver's night. What do you want for tea? What shall we watch on the television? Just those little things. And even if it means I can't watch much of the programme with him because of how he's still chosen that, and I'll duck back in. And it's about being really intentional with some of your time. And then, and I have tried to, I've taken him away on my own when the boys have got a little bit older. And we've just had that time together by ourselves, which has been really powerful.
Yeah. I suppose it is just that conscientiousness, isn't it? Of just remembering the impact that anything like that has on. And yeah, suddenly there's a lot of pressure, I think, for anybody in that circumstance to kind of, not only have you got to think about your own well-being and also then the son who's got additional needs, but also then other family members who will be affected by that. So it's kind of an all-out kind of impact on you. So I know that you do an awful lot about your self-care, personal resilience and things like that. What things do you know about that now that you wish you'd known then?
Oh, another good question, Andy. I think I would, if I could go back in time now and go back to the mum I was right at the beginning, I would say, don't believe everything you think about yourself. It's not true. You're blaming yourself. You're making big assumptions. It's not the case. I would say that you are enough. You are good enough. And the only reason you doubt how good you are is because you love your children so much. The parents, as a teacher, I've been blessed to educate hundreds of children over the last almost 20 years. But I've also seen lots of neglect. I've seen lots of child protection issues. And those parents never question whether they're good enough. They never ask, am I doing the right thing for my kids? And so it's the parents that really do beat themselves up, that are doing above and beyond. And I think sometimes, we don't ever give ourselves credit. We don't stop as parents of neurotypical children. We don't stop to give ourselves credit, let alone parents of children with disabilities and special needs. So, I'd say, yeah, don't believe everything you think about yourself. You absolutely are enough. I would say it's not your fault, but then whether I would have believed that or not, I don't know at that time, but it is something that comes into play. And I would just say, make sure you look after yourself. I've had quite a few health scares over the past few years, suspected mini stroke, things like this. And it's because I've allowed myself to burn out. I've allowed myself to just be at the bottom of a very long list. And sometimes looking after ourselves feels really selfish, but it's the most powerful and impactful thing we can do for our children.
Yeah. I think, there's something we mention an awful lot on this podcast is kind of the making sure that your bucket or glass or whatever analogy we use as far as well-being is concerned, it's got to be full to be able to kind of spare enough for everybody else. But I think it's just such a hard thing to do. I think people who don't have responsibility on anybody else find it hard on a day-to-day basis to maintain their well-being. So add in the needs of others on top of that is huge.
Yeah, and I think there's an assumption that it has to be, a spa day or something that's going to take all of your time. Whereas I'm really passionate. There was a blog that was written a few years ago that really infuriated me. And a lady published this blog saying, going shopping without your kids is not self-care. Having a shower is not self-care. That's basic hygiene. That's basic household management. And my argument was the minute we start telling people what self-care is and isn't, is the minute that we make people feel like they're getting it wrong. And we're all feeling like that. So I'm like, if sitting on the toilet for 5 minutes, scrolling on TikTok gives you a laugh and a chuckle and a bit of escapism, and if that cheers you up and just refuels you short term, then that's self-care for you. Whatever that needs to look like for you. Certainly longer breaks have a bigger impact. But for parents where they might not be fortunate enough, and I hate to use that word, to be divorced and have a respite in that respect, if they are still in a relationship and there's no respite, then sometimes 5 minutes on the toilet is all they've got realistically. So it's about looking at what you've got around you and being intentional with the time that you do have, and not feeling that you've got to be doing yoga in the garden or, out on walks and taking photographs of the sunset. Bloody hell, great, lovely. But as you say, people don't get a chance to do that without the responsibilities of caring for children.
I think what you said there is so important as far as the intention of. I always teach around self-care when people say, I don't have time for self-care. I just get everybody in the room to take a breath and go, how do you feel? And just something as simple as that. It's, even if I go around groups and I often go, what do you do to self-care? And it could be like, I'm supposed to take the dog for a walk. I said, right, there's a difference though, isn't it? Are you taking the dog for a walk for a chore? Because that's something I have to do. Or are you just taking that as an opportunity to go, this is my time. It's just me and the dog, and I'm just going to be in this moment and mindful of what I'm doing. And that's it. Then it becomes self-care. So absolutely, having a shower, if you don't usually get time to yourself, and just I'm having 10 minutes in the shower, I'm going to use body scrub. I'm just going to not rush to get washed. I'm just going to sit under that hot water for a few moments just to enjoy the sensation and the feeling on my body. Well, that's mindfulness.
Absolutely.
That's all it is.
Yeah, of course. No, and it comes back to the mindset issue, doesn't it, that we talked about earlier. But as part of Senjin and Chi CIC, I run mums meetups, and I did one this weekend in Manchester. And one of the feedback from one of the mums was, one said, I've been able to pee in peace, which was just lovely to read. I've had a warm meal to eat. I can't remember the last time I ate a meal that was warm. And you're just like, wow, so yeah, it's whatever it needs to look like for you.
Yeah. Do you have like a top 3 tips that you find most useful, particularly for parents and caregivers?
The 3 that I mentioned earlier, I think are massively important. I would say talking is a really important one, because we hide behind that smile and we don't let people in enough. And it doesn't have to be war and peace. If somebody's saying, how's your day today? And you've had a really bad day, I say, don't just say, yeah, it's been great, I'm fine, because you will be aware, Andy, the Chinese finger trap, which is this like sort of paper, I don't know how I get, like a paper wrapped sort of tube. And the more you pull your fingers out, the more it tightens around you and grips you. And the idea being that when we wrestle with things, it's that wrestle that causes the anxiety. So I would say with parents, I try and give little one-liners that they can reply with. So it's things like, I've had better days, but tomorrow's another day. Thank you for asking. And you kind of bookmark with thank you for asking, because that's like kind of the closure. Now the conversation's done, or, no, it's been an awful morning, but I'll live to see another day. Thank you for asking. And so I think, having those conversations and being brave enough to be vulnerable is really, really important. The self-care thing, massively important, and looking out for yourself is huge. I think I probably have covered everything that I would say to parent carers. Employers, again, is a different message entirely. And school children is a different message. So I just try and support everybody around the world of disability, and how that affects our lives.
I like the response you gave there as far as the just being able to say, no, I'm not okay. But I like the little finish with that of kind of going, but thank you for asking, as a kind of like, I don't need anything more from you. But I think that does also invite or give somebody the opportunity to go, oh, well, is there anything I can do to help? And if it's just that, again, a non-directive kind of offer of assistance, because it might just be a case of, do you know what? I haven't had a chance to go and get any lunch. When you nip out at lunch, would you just mind grabbing me something? It doesn't need to be a big thing, but just that offer of assistance might open up my idea to go, no, I don't need to look after my kid, but do you know what? I forgot to get a sandwich this morning.
Yeah. Or, can I have a brew? Can you just stick the kettle on and make me a brew, please? That'd be lovely.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it doesn't need to be a big thing, but I think that's a lovely response to that question that actually opens up. Because I think some people are scared to give the kind of, no, I'm not okay, because then it's almost inviting that expectation of, but I don't want a counselling session now. I don't want to talk about it. I don't need you to go above and beyond or start contacting me daily, but this will be enough for me. So,
and I think what a phrase like that does is it relieves, it's a bit like the valve. It kind of relieves that pressure of somebody saying, are you okay? And you say, no, I'm fine. And then you're rest, of course I'm not fine. And you've got that inner resentment then. You've got that inner angst, the inner anger at life in general, because you can't say and mean it that you are absolutely fine. Whereas if you can just give it a little nod and just gauge, you know what, I've had the morning from hell, but today's, tomorrow's a new day. Thank you for asking. It just kind of diffuses it for me, certainly. It just gives it a little bit of acknowledgement, but also bookends it again. But you're right. The right people will say, oh, okay, is there anything I can do? And maybe you take that the opportunity is just say, for me as a teacher, listen, could you just stick the kettle on? I've not had or just get me a juice, get me water. I've not had a drink yet. And yeah, definitely. It's just about being brave enough to be vulnerable.
I think that's a great little toolkit, definitely. So, okay, we'll I don't know how we'll go on this question then, but we'll see how we go. What are the most common questions that you get asked by parents and professionals around supporting children like Harry?
What will happen when my child dies? When I die? What will happen to my child when I die? Is the number one question that parents worry about in a mile. After that, you've got things like, how do I get what they deserve? How do I get them an education healthcare plan? In the UK, that's a document that children need. So you've got logistic questions around, what's going to happen. And then you've got the emotional questions. They tend to come afterwards because parents tend to prioritize the children over themselves. So they tend to just say, what's going to happen to my child when I'm not here? How do I get them what they deserve? How do I fill out this form and get them disability living allowance or anything like that? Unfortunately, the system that we've got is really set up to fail a lot of families. So we get logistical questions. And then once they've built relationships with me or in my community, then they will come to us and just say, does anybody else ever feel like this is just too hard? Does anybody else feel like this is just too much? Does anybody else think they're not doing a very good job? And you get those real raw questions. They tend to, 90% of the time they're anonymous, which makes me sad because, I feel like people feel there's shame in that feeling and there really isn't. Professionals will come to me more so asking for signposting. They will come to me and say, we've got this mum who is experiencing X, Y, and Z. What would you recommend for her? So I tend to get the signposting questions from professionals. But the mums and dads, I've got a dad's community as well now. They tend to be, interestingly, the dads are asking for emotional support, be it, to a lesser extent. There's much, much fewer dads in the group. more than people realise and recognise. And they think that dads are untouched emotionally by a disabled child, and that's actually not the case. I've seen that's not the case. So yeah, it tends to be a mixture of logistics and emotional, but logistics first.
Yeah. Which I suppose is almost they're asking permission to start off with, aren't they? Am I allowed to be vulnerable with you? And again, I need permission to think about myself, but I need to make sure that my child's okay first.
Yeah, and I think they need to know, they sound out that the environment is a safe place without judgment.
Mm,
Lots of parenting groups can be very judgmental.
right.
Um, and so it's a very frightening thing to put yourself out there and say, I'm really struggling, to be hit with judgment or shame
Mm,
and things like that. So I think there's a lot of testing the water initially.
yeah. Yeah. Um, with that question, then, as far as the will my child be okay when I die? That must be something you've wrestled with yourself as well. I think you've mentioned it a couple of times now. So you
Yeah.
must have been through that journey. Do you feel that question ever gets answered in a way that feels satisfying, or will that be a worry for now and for forever?
Yeah. Like, listen, in an ideal world, I would die on a Monday, and Harry would pass on a Monday morning, and I'd pass Monday afternoon, and that's an
Mm.
awful thing to say.
No,
Awful.
I completely understand. Yeah.
But that's what goes through our head. It's like
Mm,
I just don't want them to be, particularly when they're not particularly verbal. And you're aware of these care homes that don't treat our children or young people as well as they could. However, they are the minority.
mm,
There's a lot, we hear a lot about them in the press, but there are countless places that are doing wonderful things. Um, and interesting that you've asked that, because for me, when I mentioned earlier that I'm really passionate about self-talk, there's two things that I talk about, and that's acceptance and acknowledgement. And people will often say, oh, you just need to accept. You just need to accept that Harry's disabled. You just need to accept that. And my stance is, I don't need to accept anything. There are some things in my life that I will never accept. I can accept that Harry will always need somebody. And so I'm not going out like my friends are, who've got 19-year-old kids at home that are out having parties, or, I need a babysitter, and will need a babysitter for a long time.
mm.
That's a demeaning term for Harry, but you know what I mean? Sort of care for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, I completely accept that. I'm fine with that. I don't accept that I am going to leave my son very vulnerable in a world without me to protect him, but I can
Mm,
acknowledge that. And once I've acknowledged it, then I can put a plan in place, and that takes me out of the victim state. So when you can't accept something, at least acknowledge it, acknowledge that it's big, that it's hard, that it's complex, and take one tiny step forwards in a plan.
mm,
And so for me, I attended a free webinar that MenCap run, which is something I would recommend everybody do, on wills and trusts. And it just gave me and my ex-husband the confidence and the skills and the knowledge to put in place a trust fund for Harry, a letter of wishes, a care plan. And so I feel a lot better, not great,
no.
but a lot better about Harry's future when I'm not in it.
Mm. I take it. I did wonder whether you'd kind of put those sorts of things in place, because again, it's that obviously that mindset of, and I like the acceptance and acknowledgement side of things. For me, I still think there is an acceptance, but it's accepting. Yes, I'm always going to feel like that.
Yeah,
It's not just accepting. I'm still being accepting of me. That self acceptance, not accepting as a situation, which I think
yeah,
which is really really positive way of looking at it. But it's that I need to not accept that things are just okay.
yeah,
I need to make them as okay as I possibly can.
yeah.
Um,
And not accept for everybody else's peace of mind. Sometimes they'll say, well, I see you're struggling. I think you should accept that. And I'm like, well, thanks, Karen, but I'm not today.
so I take it you've got quite a lot of information on Harry. As a parent, have you got a care plan for him? I'm assuming you do have other people in his life that do help support and care for him as well now at times. So,
We don't have respite care. He's at college 3 days a week, and he has a placement in sort of community care on a Thursday and Friday, and they are both well aware of his care plans. But it's really interesting because a care plan in black and white looks really quite daunting. When Harry first went to his Thursday, Friday provision, he was 2-to-1 in the community, and that makes him sound like some sort of violent offender. And when it's written down in black and white, it looks very sort of, dire. And then you meet them and you go, oh, okay. So it doesn't tell me that he's absolutely fanatical about mayonnaise on pork pie. And it doesn't tell me that he's obsessed with playing the piano. And, so the care plan is there. for the bare bones of Harry on his worst day. And then Harry comes along and people meet him on his best. And the truth is somewhere in between the two.
It's a big thing I try and put into when I'm supporting and writing behavioural plans. My whole concept is targeting the positive, and so therefore I think a behavioural plan should include that he really likes mayonnaise, because rather than focusing on, well, what triggers him, what causes this, what causes that, how can I stop him getting angry, how can I stop him hitting? What does he really like? What makes him happy? Because if he's happy, he's not hitting. So straight away, if I know he loves mayonnaise, and I could just I'm going to have a shit ton of mayonnaise on me. Do you know what I mean? And then, so that's what a care plan for me should be. It should be about the positives of this individual. What are the key things that a staff member could connect with Harry about his loves and his passions and stuff?
And I think there's two aspects there. I think the care plan absolutely needs to be positive. The funding plan doesn't. That's the sad truth of the world and the system that we've got. I've done the HCP reviews with teachers before now, and they've said, we can't put that Harry can do this independently because he can't quite yet, and you'll lose the funding. You'll lose his place. If we make this sound too positive, they will say he can go into a mainstream school, even though he can't look after, not certainly for Harry, but other children will get that sort of difference. Disability living allowance form for parents is excruciating. It can take months. It requires regular breaks to have a cry and a cup of tea because you feel like you're betraying your children. You feel you only describe them on their very worst day, and heaven forbid you should say something positive about them. And it's just so wrong. The system is just designed to break people, and is achieving that.
It's incredibly true. It is incredibly sad, but yeah, that for getting the funding to get the additional support, you've got to paint the very bleakest picture you possibly can, because they'll pounce on anything positive.
And then once that's in place, then the care that goes around them, that's all about get to know my child, please. Yeah. Get to know my young person, and buy mayonnaise.
I love that. I think that was a fantastic answer at the end there, Charlie. So that was absolutely brilliant. So, well, thank you so much I feel like I've definitely learned a few bits on this, which is always nice for me. So that's really appreciated. And yeah, hopefully people out there listening can really connect with some of the story you've got. And we'll make sure we put links to your businesses, because I think some of those questions that you mentioned, it is having the right place to go to feel comfortable to ask those questions. And they're not questions you can, talk to your own family about, especially if there's guilt and shame around it and stuff like that. So yeah, I'll make sure we do some signposting over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm off for a little lie down in a dark room now. Thank you, Andy.
Is it wrecked you that badly?
Thank you.
No, that was absolutely fantastic, Charlie. Thank you so much for going through everything with us. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Hopefully there's a few questions that challenged you, kept you interested.
It did challenge me. Yes. So yeah, that was really good. Thank you.